Welcome to Generations of X, the podcast where we discuss the past, present, and future of all things X-Men. I'm your co-host, the Uncanny Dayspring.
And I'm your other co-host, the Adjectiveless Flinkman. And you guys, today is a very good day for Dayspring and I. We've got some very special guests. It's making me feel like it's Saturday morning in 1992 again. We're both super excited. Dayspring, why don't you give them an introduction?
I am just fanboying the fuck out right now. They are the authors of X-Men, the art and making of the animated series, available now at your local bookstore. Go buy it. It is worth it. We're even doing a giveaway on our Instagram, so go check us out there. But most importantly, our guests are responsible for giving us our childhood. They gave us the X-Men animated series. One was a showrunner of the series. The other was a writer who gave us episodes like Days of Future Past. We have Eric
and Julia
Lewald.
Hello, guys.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. It really, really is an honor to have you here. How are you guys doing today?
Aside from being 2020, it's been a good day.
Right?
Beautiful out here in Southern California.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't it always?
Perfect
though?
day.
Oh,
Yeah.
We are so fortunate.
Wait, Julia, are you still playing Fortnite?
I'm on Apple iPhone, and they haven't. I'm stuck in Apple iPhone purgatory where they aren't upgrading any more Fortnite stuff. So I play alone.
No.
It's very lonely.
Wait, so you haven't been able to play the X-Men skins yet?
The day it came out was the day they put the paywall up, and Fortnite said no. It's like I can't play. I can't play.
Oh,
So yeah, there is no justice in this.
so unfortunate.
It's so unfortunate. Okay, so before we dive into our questions, and guys, I'm so sorry. We have so many questions. But before we dive in, I just want to say thank you to the both of you. We grew up, Flinkman and I grew up as outsiders, and the show was a beacon for us. And we never felt alone when thinking of Xavier and his school for those who were different.
Yeah, and just sort of to piggyback off of what Dayspring said, the animated series definitely meant a lot to both of us, and it meant a lot to a lot of people, actually. I was at your panel in San Diego a couple years back, 2018, and that room was packed. Everyone was so excited. It was a really, really special experience for me. So, I'm sure it was special for you guys as well. So just thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, really, thank you.
So the series is still so incredibly popular in large part because of the Twitter you guys started a couple years ago. I was right there, one of your first followers, like 2 days after you guys started it. But it's, yeah, exactly. and it was you, Julia. You're the one who started it, right?
Yeah. You can blame me for everything on it because I'm still... I sound so hip and cool because I play Fortnite, but I'm like, what does this button do? I don't know. Did I just send this? I don't know. So it is not.
Well, you're doing a great job.
You're doing a fabulous job. But the series is still so popular, and I know you guys have a lot of people come up to you at conventions, and they say, "Hey, I'm in my 30s. My kids are watching it." Why do you think people in their 30s who are now having kids are showing them this series?
Thing, and I'm jumping in fast here, the dumb luck, the kismet, whatever, but the fact that Disney Plus has put X-Men animated series on its streaming service now. No one called us, we didn't, in other words, that was a magic, wonderful surprise, and suddenly there's a way to watch it, because for the last several years,
For a couple of years, it was off.
we own the DVDs, but they don't have a Blu-ray set out yet, and it wasn't playing consistently in any one place.
Yeah, but I think to your question, we worked on dozens of other shows, and they aren't really showing anymore, and some of them don't hold up as well as we might have wanted them to. And I think there's just something about the X-Men situation, the X-Men setup, and us trying to make the stories about the characters and have them being timeless and not timed, not 1992 heavy. Trying to make stories about stuff that anybody could understand, not just what was hip at the time. A lot of shows we've had to work on. Especially the more comedic ones, saying, "Oh, well, we've got to be really current and relevant, and make gags that everybody on the playground will get this fall or this quarter." And we weren't thinking about that at all. we're just thinking about what are the most intense stories we can tell about the characters we've been handed. And luckily, we're allowed to do that by the executives above us and encouraged to do that, where usually we're not.
Yeah.
Well, I love that in the book you guys mentioned that you made these stories to have a lot of layers. That you weren't talking down to the audience, that the children will intuitively know that there was more to these stories, and that's why they would keep coming back to it. But wait, so I wanted to ask about Disney Plus. They did not consult you. Because if they did, the episodes would be in order.
Yes.
Boy, howdy. And we've been trying, we're just saying, who do we don't know anybody to reach out to say, hey, Disney Plus, can you fix this? But just trying to, does anyone know who to call about that?
Yeah.
How do you get a hold of Disney?
We'll keep trying. It's a huge organization, and
I think they just got the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix saga sequence figured out. They just put those in the right order.
Someone told us, because it was like 1, 3, 2, 4 on Dark Phoenix, and they got that straight.
So I think they just straightened.
But there's 3 or 4 others that are out of order, that are a problem. And
I mean, if there's 2 stories you have to get in order, it's the Phoenix and the Dark Phoenix saga. So thankfully they cleared that one up.
Yeah.
So something that is really just astonishing to me, given how successful you were in adapting the material and making it so timeless, is that neither of you really had any experience with the X-Men before you started working on the show. What did that research process for the first season look like? What were you reading? Did you have someone that you could lean on for reading recommendations?
Both. It was reading a few of the books to get a sense of how the stories went, but it was some heavy-duty reading into Marvel reference material. And the number one was the 1988 Marvel Universe, this massive book that had everybody's relationship to everybody else, and their histories and their powers and what they'd been through, and when they were good and when they were bad, and how they evolved. And it was kind of like a graduate course in X-Men over 6 or 7 days.
It was 1992. There was no internet. Google didn't exist.
Yeah.
This all had to be acquired either through someone faxing it to you or physically mailing it to you from Marvel in New York. Larry Houston, one of the artist-producers on the show, he was a big fanboy, as was Will Mineo, also producer, director, artist on the show. And they had that side locked down cold and were able to tell you where to look.
And we had access from day one to Bob Harris, who was the guy at Marvel Comics in New York, so 3,000 miles away, but still. Phone reachable or faxable, since there was no email yet. So faxable, well, I could fax questions to Bob. I'd say, okay, we're trying to do a Storm story. I've got these 6 questions about what her background is or how she would react to the certain characters that we're throwing at her. And even though this poor guy had the responsibility of running 3 X-Men titles at once, at Marvel, he took the time out to read our questions and read our scripts and be supportive and keep us on the right track.
Yeah, well, I have to say that, coming up with the first season like that, which really was super all-encompassing of the X-Men, and the amount of time that you did is just incredibly impressive. I mean, I almost think that someone like me or Dayspring, who's been a fan our whole life, couldn't do as good of a job. We'd be far too biased and overthink it. And you guys y'all streamlined it down to that really accessible level, and it was very, very impressive for sure.
Agreed. What I love about what you talk about in the book is that you guys were writers first, and then you built from there.
That's a fair way of looking at it. Yeah, agreed. In terms of servicing a story, whoever your characters are, whatever you're trying to do, it can be easily forgotten in all the bells and whistles, but just trying to service a story. These folks happen to have superhero powers, but that also makes their human frailties even more in contrast.
Yeah, and I think part of it was when we had a lot of writers, a number of writers that were fans that knew the book, 25 years of the books backwards and forwards, and there were a couple issues with them. One is they didn't understand that most of the vast majority of the audience didn't know who the X-Men were. So they would take things for granted. Don't you know? This is someone's nephew, and this is someone these people fought before. So that was, we didn't have that little bit of blindness that we were too soaked in the lore that we would take things for granted. So that was one advantage for us. The other was they loved, for good reason, they loved the book so much that they would might have a real agenda and say, okay, I need to squeeze these 18 characters into this story with all their powers and all their background and all, because it's important. The viewers must see this, before the end of this first season, or I will have failed the X-Men.
Right.
So we were able to step back from that and be a little bit dispassionate and say, okay, that's all very exciting. We'll show off 3 of those people in this story, not 18.
Yeah.
And take it. So it was a really nice balance, we think, and I think it really helped the show that there was a mixture of true believers and newbies that were thrown together.
I got to write the episode, Whatever It Takes, with season 2.
Yeah.
Where Storm returns to Africa. And being newer to the characters, I had a question and asked one of the folks working on the show who was a hardcore fanboy person. I said, okay, how would Storm approach this issue? And he said, well, she wouldn't. I go, okay, no, all right, so this thing's happening. How would Storm tackle it? She wouldn't. She would never, that wouldn't even, okay, you're not hearing me.
It's not very helpful.
This is going to happen. Storm's going to be there. How can we make this work? So there was a real balance, a real sort of having to adjust. For these things.
Yeah. I think it really served the show to have that fresh set of eyes on it. It really served the material well. And something else that the show does really well and was definitely kind of groundbreaking for kids TV at the time was your seasons had overarching story arcs. When did you decide you wanted to do that versus just have like individual standalone episodes?
At the very beginning, Will Mineo, was like the heart and soul behind the first season, that fought all the political fights and had a real vision for the show, because he'd been longer in this business than any of us and had been a crazed Marvel fan since 1961.
Yeah.
He really believed that this should be as close to the comic book experience as it could be, and comic books tell serialized stories.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things missing from the half dozen comics-oriented shows he'd been allowed to work on in the years past. And Mark Edens and I, who were tasked with laying out the first 2 seasons of stories.
Eric's the writer, his head writer on the show.
Yeah.
We love big, long, involved stories, and just think that it's much more satisfying, like, to have a serialized story, say hour dramas on prime time or on streaming, that you can get into the characters so much more deeply if the thing continues for 13 hours rather than just giving them one shot and then you're done. So we really pushed for that as well, and it was a tough call for the executives at Fox, because as this book shows, making animated shows in the 90s when everything was hand painted slowly took 7 to 9 months when everything went right. And if episode 3 screwed up, then you couldn't show up. If they're serialized, you're stuck. You can't show episode 4 till you get episode 3 fixed, and that could take a month. And so what are you going to be in repeats for a couple months while you're waiting for episode 3? So Fox took that risk, and there was some delay because of that in that first season. And after that, they said, well, I don't know if we can do this anymore. But we really still wanted to. Yeah. So we snuck in lots of 2-parters, and we put that thing with the Savage Land in the second season, where you've got a 2-parter, 9 individual stories, and a 2-parter at the end that are kind of and the ones in the middle could all be told out of order.
And they were. I mean,
the ones that the 9 in the middle, they didn't really progress. They kind of felt like they did, but they didn't really.
Right.
But the thing that one little 1-minute thing when the Savage Land progressed, and so Fox went for that. Said, okay, we'll animate the thing in the Savage Land first, so we know we'll have that in order. And if episode 5 comes in and it's bad, we'll swap it with episode 7, and people will notice. So that was like one way to keep them going in order. And the second way was to get 5-parters and 4-parters, like the Phoenix sagas, to so that it was a noble idea, and I think it really helped the show. And I think the audience loved it.
I agree. I think so
But
too.
but looking back on it, it was a very tough business decision that probably cost them, $1 million in a couple months delay.
Yeah.
Wait,
Well, it certainly paid off.
Wait, to clarify, it paid off, but to clarify, so the Savage Land scenes were all illustrated first, and
Right.
because Fox wanted everything to be standalone, you guys did those first, and then you just sliced those into, the episode.
Yeah, we had one script that had 9 little 1-minute
Little tags.
things going on in the Savage Land that kind of built, and they'd meet new people and they'd overcome them and they get closer to Sauron or whatever. And that progression was all written by itself. And then a minute was left in each of the 9 middle episodes to put in, the next Savage Land thing.
Yeah.
And luckily, I don't think we had any production delays that year. So the 9 episodes you saw were the order that we intended. But if we'd had to flip a couple, we could have done that and just kept the Savage Lands in order.
Gotcha.
You guys were prepared for any scenario.
But as Flickman said, I thought it did pay off. It did pay off a lot.
Yeah. I think not going with a villain of the week approach, which was certainly common for Saban at the time, looking at Power Rangers, there was no interconnectivity between those episodes at all. And making many of the villains, most especially Magneto, super relatable, but that was also a risk, but it definitely paid off.
That was the thing I've come to realize and appreciate more when you and Mark Edens when you sat down to develop the show. You had been given marching orders for 13 episodes because no one believed it was going to run past that.
Yeah.
But Margaret Lesh, the woman in charge of Fox Kids, really wanted to make this show. So, okay, you get to gamble on these 13 episodes, Margaret, but if it doesn't work out, you're out of here. Okay, fine.
Margaret.
You, with those first 13 episodes, it was, well, what is it going to be a bad mutant of the week kind of fight in each episode, or is it going to be something a little bigger, which would be
about the nature of mutancy and the nature of exclusion and the nature of an extraordinary minority scaring the hell out of a majority, and that's many more human stories that way. We look back at the books and if you've read the books, both things are in there. There are some books that are just nonstop, like professional wrestling fight. Which super mutant's going to beat the other super mutant? We'll know by page 20. And that just really, we've been through it long enough, and the executives above us, like Sidney Iwander, and been through it enough. They said, no. We want this to be closer to primetime drama, to serialized primetime drama like Hill Street Blues, where it's all about the characters. And so we obviously had big, massive, spectacular fights, but we thought of them as necessary scenes, like in a Western. You got to have a gunfight, but don't make the story about the gunfight. Make it about the characters.
Yeah, and I think
a lot of.
Go ahead.
You've gotten pushback to start with Magneto.
Yeah.
To begin the series with Magneto, and he doesn't come in until it was 3 or 4.
He's 3.
Episode 3, but that gave you time to set up this universe. So when Magneto comes in, you go, he's okay. That's his point of view, but he might not be wrong, and
right.
Xavier's got his point of view, and he might not be wrong.
Because you've seen the Sentinels and you've seen their murderous intent, and you've seen them kill an X-Men. By the time you meet the biggest adversary of the X-Men, you have sympathy for mutants in general, and you're gonna give Magneto a listen.
Right.
the way Beast listened to him in jail, but told him thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, and I think that having that drama and having that relatability to the villains, that's something that the X-Men need. You need that to tell a successful X-Men story, and I think that so far your series has probably adapted that the best, in my opinion.
And to jump back to what you were saying earlier, Julia, about whatever it takes, so our listeners at home know, you wrote that episode, and it was such a great episode. And you also wrote the Days of Future Past episode, which was a wonderful adaptation.
I can claim part 1 on that. With Bob Skier and Marty Eisenberg on part 2. But yeah, got to do those episodes specifically.
So you guys are great writers. You've proven you deliver really great quality scripts. My question, when I was reading both your books, that I just could not understand, Why were you getting so much pushback from Saban, from merch? Like, why was it such a warped concept that you guys were building a foundation? You know, you had to build the foundation and then the house from there. Why was there so much pushback?
I'm convinced that because, again, 1992, got to remember where the world was at that time in terms of how people consumed TV.
Yeah.
You had Saturday mornings and you had the afternoon blocks for kids. Trying to program to that, you'd only had ABC, NBC, and CBS as the big three major networks, and you had syndicated affiliates, but those are the three that went national. And then Fox decided to try and enter that field and become Fox Network, along with becoming Fox Kids. And there had not been a show like X-Men before that had succeeded like X-Men before. And if we could bottle it, we would. Yeah. Everybody in Hollywood would bottle it.
You never know. Yeah, well, there were a couple problems. One is you've got this 9-month delay from when you pitch a show and you show maybe the first script to when the show goes on the air, and you can see whether it's going to be successful or not. Mm-hmm. And so even though these were moderate to lower budget things, the people investing in the first season of the X-Men were investing about $5 million.
Yeah.
And among those people were local TV stations, advertisers, merchandisers, whoever, Marvel, they all had a financial stake in this. And they're always second guessing. I mean, it's hard not to when you've got that much at stake. And they literally hadn't seen anything like this before, and they just didn't get it. Yeah. And so they were scared. Okay, we're going to put this money into this, and it's going to evaporate. You know, it's going to show. You know, it's going to show for 6 months, and then it's going to get dumped, and there'll be something sweet and funny replacing it the next fall, which happens when and the majority of TV shows fail. So it's not like it would be an unusual thing to have a show fail. What we had going for us was everybody in the creative side and everybody at the television network, which had the last say in it, even above Marvel, believed in this way of doing it. They got lots and lots of pressure, again, from people that wanted a different show and maybe wanted to take over the running of it. And it happens a lot in Hollywood. There's a lot of, oh, well, no, if you'd only let me run the show and put, I will make you all the money that you're hoping to do because I understand this world better than the rest of you do, and I'll make all these changes and I'll be the savior for your show. There's that kind of coup attempts in on 10% of the shows that get made out here. There can be lots of infighting.
Because nobody knows.
Yeah,
truly nobody knows
until the audience, the audience looks at it and says, this came together and the magic happened. Yeah, you really don't know. So everybody has an opinion, and some people have more background or more clout or louder voices or whatever. And if you believe that you're trying to save your show and keep it from going off the rails, you just have to dig in and fight that and pray that you win. Because sometimes, even if with the best intentions, the people that are putting the money up finally shrug and say, well, we're getting all this criticism about your show's too dark and adult and not funny enough. Leave, and we're going to put in somebody that can make it a bit younger and funnier. It's at the writing stage, that's easy to do. The problem with animation, it takes so long to see how it works. If it was a live action show, you shoot the pilot, and then the next day you could have an audience and have them watch and see if they get it or not.
Yeah.
Even then, some very successful shows, they'll have these test audiences and they'll go, ugh. And the person involved that really believes in the show has to stay fighting that to keep it from being changed. Well, I mean, of all things, Star Trek had 2 pilots because they watched the first pilot and it just wasn't right. I wish I wish most people wish there was that much latitude in TV. That happens almost never, that they're allowed to then spend the money again and do a completely different one. But yeah, that's it. It just was so different. And that's the thing, a lot of times in music and TV and movies, the things that really grab people are something new and different.
Yeah.
And the reason that it freaks people out who are putting the money up for it, is because it's so new and different. Because they haven't seen it before, and they go, "Oh my God, I'm rolling the dice here." So we understand the pushback. It wasn't pleasant while we were fighting it.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you
I
for
can't
fighting it, because I did not want Xavier and Cyclops with a dog in a van. Thank you for saving our
True
family.
story. True story.
True story.
That's just ridiculous. That's ridiculous. So jumping to the look of the show for just a moment. Obviously, the costumes used on the show were the Jim Lee designs, which of course became super iconic. You know, many of the characters revert back to a version of them time and time again. But when you were developing that first season, obviously they were pretty much brand new. What was it about those costumes that made them the right choice over looks like Cyclops with his hair covered or Storm with a tiara, you know, that had been tried and true for decades?
Well, those are more people like in the book, Will Mineo, who made a lot of those decisions, or at least stood by them and shepherded them through to the end. Some of those decisions were made for what worked best in animation, but
because again, this was not computer generated. Someone had to literally hand paint every single
and
cell.
so if you got a much busier style from somebody, you just tripled the animation budget,
Mr. Sinister.
You were talking about the lines on his costume. That's why, but it worked in your favor because it now looks like he's coming out of the shadow.
We couldn't afford to animate as many lines as there are. So yeah, he became very Bela Lugosi Dracula-like. He would ease in and out of shadows and suddenly appear to people without turning, because turning was so expensive.
But that was a Larry Houston workaround where he took something that's crud and figured out how to make it happen.
But we're new to this. We're just had our heads down writing the stories. People like Will and Larry knew every single costume that the X-Men had since 1963, and decided we're starting with Jim Lee, and we're making these decisions, and we've decided on this team of 8 out of the 28 or whatever we could have chosen out of the 30 years of the books.
Right, because we had 15 too.
So given that, here's how we'll, and given the needs of animation, here's the costumes we're starting with down to the last detail, and here's the subtle adjustments we're making to allow us to animate them well. So that was all quick decisions by the art staff, then seeing them played out, deciding, that was all on them. And we're thrilled with the end result, but we knew so little about the history. And we know how much it means to fans, and we know how much looking back, artistic decisions like that can affect the show, because if they look wrong, nobody's going to buy the show.
Right.
But it wasn't something we really had a hand in.
Wait. One of the decisions you guys, the show made, and I know you just said you didn't, but that is really iconic right now, is giving Miss Jean Grey, my favorite X-Man, a ponytail. What was the decision? Did you know? Is it just something the designer made the tweak for it and you just accepted it? Or were you like, no, we'll give Jean a ponytail so she can look different from Storm and Rogue? But because it's endured.
I swear it was a design decision based on how fluid. How do you move your head? How do you move your
partially
hair?
a movement thing. I think if you look through Will Mineo's work, and I've seen about 25, 30 years of it, he sent me. He loves drawing women. That's his favorite thing on the planet. Some people love action shows. Some people love, drawing fights. Whatever. Will loves drawing women, and Jean was the first character he drew for the show. And I just think it just was something that he sensed that came out of her character and informed her character a little bit. There's just something, you would never put Storm in a ponytail. That would be weird.
You could, but
that would be weird. But giving it to Jean kind of made her even more, the girl next door that everybody could talk to. And that he did that just instinctively, and it was just his choice to have that as an alternative, as one of her approved looks for the show.
Well, as a very crazy neurotic Jean fan, thank you for giving her a topsy tail.
Well, just real quick, while we're talking about character design, I want your opinion on this. This is a long-standing debate within the X-Men fan base. Is Storm's costume black and shiny, or is it white with shadows?
Ooh, okay. If we're talking this
Yeah.
on the cover, that's white with shadows.
That's white,
Boom.
yeah.
That's
Boom,
what I said.
right there. You settled the debate
Because
right.
it is white, but there have been iterations where is it blue and gold, is it black and white? Okay, yeah, she does have iterations where she's in black, but mostly in our show she was in white.
Yeah.
If that counts, that window of time.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So I have a question. So the designs are based off of Jim Lee. You guys talked about this in the book. And when Jim Lee left and he went to go start Image Comics, it sort of, Marvel kind of came back and they were like, no, we don't really want to use these designs anymore. Do something else. And you guys didn't want to because it was going to throw off your production schedule. But I need to know, how bad were the designs that you gave them that they actually were like, nope, thank you, we'll just take our chances, like, with keeping the Lee?
Yeah, the story of it is, it's not unusual for a company. They've just lost half a dozen of their main designers, and Jim Lee was one of them. And so they didn't want to, the knee-jerk reaction from a corporate standpoint, from a business standpoint, is we don't want to be celebrating or supporting the people that just left us in the lurch.
But it's 1992, so we don't know this.
Which
no one's telling us.
Yeah, which didn't mean anything to us producing the show. All it did for us producing the show was, okay, that's going to set us back 6 weeks, and we're already behind. And
Will's already designed everything.
Yeah, and it's going to weaken the show because there's an absolute consensus that this is the right look for the show. So we're going to have to think of something else. And so, but it was pretty much an edict, like, we're not going forward unless you get rid of the way the show's designed. And so I have not seen the Scooby-Doo X-Men.
We have looked. We have searched.
Yeah. And Will doesn't have them anymore, but Will definitely designed them, because I think I've seen some old memos where he sent them around to all the people
with a straight face.
Yeah,
saying,
in
you want a
charge.
new design,
And
here's
people
your new design.
Like co-designer Rick Hoberg and Stan Lee and other people are just losing their minds. Will, what are you doing? This is awful. This has nothing to do with the show we talked about. And so that got in, and it gave them pause enough to think, well, we need to do what's best for the show. Let's not let a petty corporate difference, the fact that Jim's no longer with us, make us get rid of his look, because his look is going to be best for the show. So it took a few days for them to calm down and figure it out, but they came to the right decision. And
Absolutely.
I would pay a lot to see what Will sent them, because he threw them away, and I wish he hadn't.
Oh, I wish he hadn't. I was looking for them in the book. When you said it, I was like, what page are these on? And I never found them.
They aren't there. They're not there to be found anymore, which is heartbreaking. But that's, again, 30 years later. Stuff's not stored on a computer. We were lucky to find what we found.
Yeah.
Right.
So in many ways, your show was a reaction to Pryde of the X-Men, and specifically what didn't work for Pryde of the X-Men, i.e. Stan's narration, the intro song, not humanizing the mutants the way you guys did. So I'm just curious, though, what elements didn't work for you guys? Because for me, like, as a fanboy, I do look at Pryde of the X-Men and I love it. You know what I mean? I love the toy animation, but I'm curious, when I put like a writer's hat on, what was it about it that just felt very wrong?
The thing that really gave us pause was they just seemed to jam it with too many characters.
You couldn't service all the characters that they were asking you to
our hardest challenge every week was, you've got 9 main good guy characters. You've got to have a few bad guy characters. You maybe have a guest character like Nightcrawler. You've got all these people you're trying to service. And we kept on trying to simplify and simplify and simplify, so that maybe only be 3 X-Men, 2 guests and 1, father-in-law.
Whatever it takes. Storm and Rogue.
And you touch base with the rest of the team, but you focus on 2 or 3, because it's really difficult to get to know and love and bond with the characters if you only see them for 5 seconds and they shoot their power and they're gone. And that was, I think, part of the problem with Pryde of the X-Men was they're using it as a sales tool, and hoping to sell merchandise, hoping to show, look at all the different characters we can use in the series. And in doing that, you never had time to really bond with any of them. And that's what that kitchen sink amount of characters was what hit me when I watched it and said, oh, we can't tell stories like this. I think this is the reason it didn't catch on. Not because it isn't cool and beautifully animated.
Great. Yeah,
I think they spent more on it than we did on our animation. It looks good. It's got some cool stuff in it, but that and some creative decisions like making Wolverine Australian. Not because it served a story, only because Crocodile D was popular and they thought the kids might like the X-Men better if they sounded more like Crocodile Dundee. And that's the reason. There are those kind of decisions all through Hollywood, and you're sympathetic because the people putting up the money are risking a lot of money, and they don't know any better. They just know that this guy with a hat from Australia has made $2 billion in the last 3 years, and that, hey, that might help our show. And they will then insert that into your show where it doesn't fit and it's wrong, it's terrible.
Now, I'm going to jump in. The same people that worked on that show at a different level at Marvel at the time went on to work on X-Men at Fox.
Will and Larry and Margaret and Sydney and all those people.
They had people above them when they were doing Pryde of the X-Men that forced those kinds of Australians are hot, make Wolverine Australian that they couldn't push back against. When Margaret became president of Fox Kids and it all fell in line for X-Men, those people were in place and had gone through the experience of having folks say, make them Australian, kids won't care. And now we're going to draw the line in the sand and say, no, that's not how we're doing it this time.
It was a learning experience for Will and Larry. I mean, they've done a lot of producing here, but a lot of times, they've been forced to compromise in ways they thought was terrible. Well, to keep a show going and to keep my staff employed or whatever. Okay, well, we'll swallow this and we'll make Wolverine Australia. And luckily they had Margaret and Sydney, listening and sympathetic. But I think they were at the point, and we as writers were at the point where, no, we've compromised enough. When they'll suggest that some bad toys be featured in every episode, no, not this time. Fire us if you want to, but we're going to do it this way this time. And we were surrounded by people that were doing and saying the same thing, so it kind of fed on itself, and it gave us all more courage to put our foot down and risk our jobs when we had to.
Yeah. So was Pryde of the X-Men the reason we never saw Kitty Pryde on your show?
Yes. It's I think it struck which is unfair to her. I think
so unfair.
Well, there's two reasons.
Two reasons.
One is Marvel was pushing Jubilee in 1992.
Who was a new character to the books.
And so just like we didn't want to have like 8 big gruff guys be the team, we didn't want Cable and Colossus and Thunderbird and Wolverine and we didn't want that to be the team. We wanted everybody to be as different as possible, and having 2 teenage girls just wasn't room on the team. We could have had a guest appearance with her, but I think just the fact that she was kept out of the first couple seasons, because Pryde hadn't worked, we could have had her as a guest on something. I just think it just didn't, after a couple of years of doing the show, it didn't occur to anybody to think about it.
And there were so many characters to service.
There's so many other people in the X universe to try that.
But if we had a 6th season, just saying.
Yeah.
Wait, so I want to go back to what you were talking about with the merch team and being sympathetic, but really stepping your ground there, because I was shocked to hear that story from Avi Arad, where he was insisting on these ugly like Happy Meal toys or walkie-talkies to be incorporated in the show, because he went on to do the Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies. Do you guys think you taught him a lesson?
I hope so. Because when he got on at Marvel, he had no production experience. He was a toy guy. He was it was toy biz. I was buying into Marvel when Marvel was failing financially, and he got his foot in the door there. And so his instinct at the time was just get the merchandise up front and center,
Right.
and treat the cartoons as 22-minute commercials,
Right.
which is kind of illegal, but I mean, people do it constantly. I've been on shows before where we'd get weekly updates from the toy companies about new toys they were designing, and suddenly we'd be writing new characters stories because there was a new, transforming Porsche instead of a transforming Ferrari that was coming in to do the show, whatever. So we're used to that. But he obviously is a clever executive, or grew to be a clever executive.
He's very savvy.
When he dropped in, he also knew that we like final 8 or 9 of the first scripts, and he didn't have a lot of clout, and he didn't have final say. He had to ask us. He couldn't just say that you have to have the Wolverine curtains or the Wolverine phone or the walkie-talkie in every episode, or we won't support the show. He didn't have the leverage to do that. I mean, in some shows, especially back in the 80s, the merchandisers paid for the shows, and they had all the leverage. It was just
like She-Ra and He-Man.
Yeah, there you go. So it was.
But the idea of Wolverine using a walkie-talkie with his face on it is
ludicrous.
Not what the show is. But again, for people coming at the show from different perspectives, it's like, well, of course you put it in. Of course you have that.
Yeah.
In the book you mentioned, you were like, are we talking on walkie-talkies with our own faces on them? Like, if we want the show to be taken seriously, there have to be certain elements that we have to ask our audience to go along with. And one of them is not having walkie-talkies with Wolverine's face on them.
To be fair, I would have bought Wolverine curtains, though. I would have. But, it's a lot of people had a lot of opinions about what you're doing. And of course, Stan Lee was one of them. Sounds like he had a bunch of grand ideas for the show. And, reading the book, I agree, they all would have been awful. And I'm super glad you stood your ground. But as a Marvel fan, how do you say no to Stan Lee?
Yeah, that was the name of the chapter. It was really,
that was not a good period of time.
Because I liked Stan. I mean, I liked having.
And we still remain friends with him. We worked with him on other projects.
3 other projects.
X-Men turned out great.
Afterward,
but it took that.
But the thing was that.
Sorry, my dog is coughing.
The way I would describe it to people was, okay, it's 1992, and there's been the Vietnam War, and there've been the punk scene that had been garage bands, and Stan is trying to make us, do Pat Boone songs.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that Pat Boone isn't really good at what he does and wasn't super successful, but there's just a tone clash here that everybody involved in and I think it'd be a generational thing. Everybody that was involved.
Sorry, our phone's doing a thing.
Oh, no worries.
No worries.
Okay, I'll leave. Yeah, we'll let the phone go.
Sorry if that's true.
Everybody that was involved in the creation of the show was basically in their 30s. And Stan, I have great sympathy for him now. He's older than I am now. Stan was in his late 60s. And so there just was a different reference point. And he really didn't know the new X-Men. He knew the old X-Men that he and Jack Kirby had put together. So it was, again, just, the X-Men of 1975, 76, 77 were really different totally from what he was used to or what was in his head. And unfortunately, Stan was a really driven guy. It was one reason he's successful as he was. And he always, and incredibly creative, and more fun in most meetings than say the business people that were in the meetings. Because he's a creative guy. Yeah. And he and I always got to meetings early because we both hate being late. It's a Hollywood thing. The last person to show up at the meeting has the most status, so everybody has to wait for them. And Stan would complain about that. He's okay, Eric, you're always here early with me. And I said, I just hate making people wait. So we shared that. But he was this ball of energy. He was this driven guy, and he, as soon as he knew there was going to be an X-Men project, any project that he's had like his hand on throughout his like 50 years at Marvel. I know how I could run that. I know what that show could be, and endless confidence, endless energy, endless focus. And so he was, but being so different, it had to tamp him down because he wanted to take over the show. Yeah. He had an access to Margaret Lesh, who was the final say, had the final say, and they were close friends. They're much closer friends than Margaret and I were. And she'd worked with him for years and years at Marvel. So he had her ear, and he really didn't want to let go of feeling like this is going to be his show. And that was just, it ended up being as I say in the book, I had to say, either if you want Stan to run it, cool. If you want me to run it, but we have different ideas about what the show should be. You got to decide. You're paying me to run the show, and if I disagree with someone, though it's even if they're from Stan, I've got to tell him because it's for the good of the show. Yeah. And that gradually, Will Mineo brokered a happy peace among that, and as soon as the show played and was successful, Stan kind of backed off, deferred, and realized that we had a successful show going the different direction that he would have done it, and he started focusing on other things. But for 4 or 5 months there, that was a challenge.
So yesterday was 2 years since Stan passed.
Yes.
And I'm curious, after you guys stopped working with him on the show, I know you went on to do other projects with him. Did he ever look at you guys and say, "Hey, the X-Men animated, that was great"?
I don't think so. I think he understood its success, and so that gave a certain amount of respect, other than if we just fought him over something that failed, because we were involved in other pitches. We pitched we pitched a Thor show to a network where Stan and Avi were the Marvel side of it that just didn't go for whatever reason, and then we worked on 3 or 4 other things. And then when Stan got his website up, he hired me to do some writing of scripts and developing of series for him on that. And he was always this trusting guy, and would be taken advantage of, like with that website.
That was the hard part.
Some guy comes in and walks away with all his money, and you just feel terrible for the guy because he was this really hardworking, creative, trusting soul. He did want to be in charge of everything, which could be a problem if it was a project you were already in charge of. But that said, it was fascinating working with him. Even when I was fighting with him.
Yeah. So, we love you, Stan. We miss you, Stan, obviously. But something that really stands out to me watching this series over as an adult was the use of normal humans as the real enemy of mutants. Certainly now, because sadly, 25 years later, the hateful rhetoric spewed by Graydon Creed, the Friends of Humanity, it's unfortunately still super relevant. Was there a lot of pushback to using everyday humans as the real enemy of your show? Actually
not. No, there wasn't.
The pushback, if I want to put it that way, came from the in crafting the world, and it's creating what the world was, why the Sentinel project happened, why the Sentinels were created. The pushback came from, it can't be government driven. For us in a kid's show,
we can't
have the government authorize this.
Yeah, there was even some awkward. The only most awkward line in the first 2-parter that we were pretty much forced to put in there, saying, "Oh, this isn't the U.S. government setting up the Sentinels; it's a rogue faction within the U.S. government." And so there was some fine lines like that.
That it couldn't be from that in this world, the U.S. government can't be the big bad.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, but you're asking about that stuff, and that's one of those things that, specifically, and the female president, whom we had at the time.
I was going to say, progressive.
Oh, we saw that. Trust me. That's why, we grew up, Flinkman and I grew up the way we did, because we saw little things like that, a female president right there with the Sentinels at the White House. we just accepted that as fact. We never question it. Of course, we can have a female president.
Yeah, why not? So
Yeah, why not? but yeah, she and part in the U.S. government were not in charge of the Sentinel Project or the Friends of Humanity. Those were angry, ugly people who had their own agenda and wanted to maintain their whatever, dominant superiority, whatever. It was ugly. It was, and it remains ugly. Any of that kind of stuff is always ugly.
Well, thank you again for standing your ground on the series. One of the things of the book that I loved the most was a statement of priorities you all sent to Marvel. And it was so firm in a way, and I'm just going to regurgitate what you've already said and paraphrase it. That's like, you hired us to do this. Like, what we need help from you guys is to fill in the blanks with these characters. And I mean, how do you write something like that so great? I'm baffled, because even now in my 30s, I'm like, I would not know how to articulate myself the way you guys did in that statement of priorities.
Well, I think we were, desperation is the mother of invention.
Hello, motivator.
Yeah, we felt so desperate to keep the show on the line that we wanted it to. And we'd all been through difficult notes or lack of support, or people with other needs changing the shows we were on. We'd had fights before, and oftentimes we'd have lost them because we didn't have leverage. And then this time we felt with Fox, with Sydney and Margaret there behind us, that we had the leverage to speak our minds and say and explain that we all care about the show succeeding, and we think what you're doing isn't being helpful. We're not impugning evil intent here, but you're doing this and it's not being helpful to us. We need you to do this, and try to be as respectful and nice about it with a creative partner as you could be. And it just, I think it just came down to some serious fear about, if we didn't take these stands, that the show could be ruined, because it just takes a little to go a little off track.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe more notes come in, or B, the magic isn't quite there the way it would have been if you'd held your ground. So that was, I think it was desperation talking that.
Yeah. So after you sent them that sort of statement of priorities, did you start getting the info that you needed? Because it seems like, there was a point where you guys were almost keeping pace with the comics in terms of introducing new characters and ideas, like specifically like the Nasty Boys. They were brand new when they showed up in season 2, and, with Gambit, Belladonna, and the guilds, all of that was relatively new. Were you guys given advance notice on those things, or was they just like a natural fit?
We were, the like Larry Houston, the artists, and we were keeping up on that, and we'd get, notice about people that, like, for one thing, they'd say, oh, we want to meet Cable. He's a new guy that we're pushing. So we'd get some just general notes like that. And when we did, we would make sure to ask as many questions about, okay, who exactly is this Cable, and what does he mean to, who does he mean what to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that we could build a character. And then sometimes there was more, sometimes there was less, in sympathy to the people, creative people at Marvel who were supporting us. When in the previous efforts to do shows, the Hollywood partners very often just kind of kept them out and just said, oh, how nice, we're going to do we're going to do a Fantastic Four series. We don't need to talk to you. We're Hollywood. We do things differently. And then you get goofy sidekicks or whatever you get. And I think Marvel was used to the idea that, okay, we're going to get a fee out of this. But
that was what's happening financially at the time.
But they didn't even really assign anybody, didn't pay for anybody extra to help us. It's just, okay, Bob, you're working 70 hours a week. Also spend 20 hours a week helping these guys with their scripts. And so in that way, it was, has coming back around. I don't know that they had serious expectations about directing us through the series. They just assumed we were going to do what we wanted, and they did. And even contractually, as I mentioned, Fox had final say on stuff. So even if we did things that they didn't like, they could complain, but they had to live with it. Yeah. So I think they were assuming we were going to be. We weren't going to take much time from them or much interest from them or need information from them, but we were just desperate for it. We wanted to soak it up, and so that was an adjustment. They spent more and more time as we went along supporting us, and when we come up with new things, or when we went and decided to do both Phoenix sagas, there was some more in-depth discussion about important ways to handle that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that that stood out to me when I was reading the book that I found really curious was that from an industry perspective, they were comparing you guys to the Batman animated series. So I'm curious why they just wouldn't throw logs onto your fire instead of having so much coming at you.
Well, I think it's because at the time, Marvel was a much smaller company, and they were struggling financially.
They were about to go through bankruptcy, and they were overextended, and that was starting to fall apart. So they were part of the equation in terms of producing X-Men the animated series. There was Graz, there was Fox Kids, and
Saban.
And Saban.
And to be honest, Chaim Saban would honestly say, his interest about the dog in the van. His interest was to produce the show as cheaply as possible.
Yeah.
Because in all his experience before this in television, he'd get a certain amount of return from whatever he backed, and most of the stuff was not very special. And so the way he made a profit, the way he didn't lose his business by the end of the year, was doing everything really on the cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you had the major partner involved in the show that had absolutely no interest in making big, spectacular Marvel stories. He wanted as tiny, as simple, as cheap shows as you could get. So there's no support there.
And that was different from, say, Batman at Warner Brothers, or say Star Trek at Paramount. There was no one entity that was supportive of X-Men the animated series, which also meant when you got the call to go in and create the show back in February '92. You were already, half a year behind where Batman was? Batman development?
A year behind.
Batman animated had begun development.
A year before us.
A year before Eric got the call to go do X-Men. So there was that kind of...
Yeah, so it was it's probably... Batman had this massive multi-billion-dollar studio behind them, and they knew that this is something they had merchandising interest in, they had movie interest in, they had him set up right. And that's one reason they spent as much money as they did to make that show so beautiful, is that they knew it would be selling for 30 years. And they knew there'd be more shows, and they knew Batman was an evergreen character. So they had an interest in making their shows as beautiful as possible, like Disney does. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same kind of attitude. But we didn't have a Warner's or a Disney behind us. We were this little slapped together garage band.
Yeah.
Three or four little companies that all chipped in a little something to get this off the ground because Marvel didn't have a budget.
Right.